That strip of concrete runs along your frontage, so the repair assessment is yours, and we have already added it to your account with interest. That was Diane Mercer, president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association for the better part of 9 years, standing on my gravel apron with a clipboard pressed to her hip, telling me I owed money for a sidewalk I had never owned. The property was my corner lot at the bottom of Aspen Court, 4.5 acres of fenced pasture and a low brick shop my father poured himself in 1978. The family weight on that ground is my late wife, Carol, whose garden still comes up along the south fence every spring, whether I tend it or not. What Diane did not know, what she never once thought to verify before she started stacking fines, was that I spent 31 years as a licensed land surveyor for the county, and the maps that defined every boundary line in Cedar Hollow had passed across my own drafting table. So I want to ask you something before I tell you the rest. If a woman in white sneakers handed you a bill for a thing she could not prove you owned, and you happened to be the one person alive who had measured the ground she was standing on, what would you have done? My name is Walt Hendricks. I am 63 years old. For 31 years, I walked property lines for a living, set pins, read old deeds, and signed plats that the county recorded and relied on. I retired 5 years ago to the corner lot where I grew up, where my father ran a small machine shop, and where Carol and I raised our daughter before the cancer took her 4 years back. My daughter is grown and gone to Denver now, but my granddaughter Lily, who is 15, came to live with me the summer after Carol died because her mother works long shifts and the mountain air is good for the girl's asthma. That is the household. One old surveyor, one teenager, and a brown ranch dog named Biscuit, who thinks every car on the county road is a personal insult. Cedar Hollow was not always an HOA. When my father built the shop, this was just a scatter of working parcels along a creek, ranch land, and a few cabins. No covenants, no board, no dues. I remember the summer he poured the apron, 1978, because he made me haul the bags of dry mix from the truck to the mixer, one at a time, in the heat until my arms shook. And he stood over the wet concrete with a trowel and a level for 2 days, fussing over the pitch so the water would run off toward the road instead of into the shop. He carved his initials into the corner of it with a nail before it set. They are still there. That concrete is not a sidewalk. It is my father's 2 days of August written into stone, and a woman in clean sneakers was going to bill me for it, as though it had fallen from the sky. The subdivision grew up around us in the 90s, and somewhere along the way, a developer platted the upper streets and wrote a set of covenants for the new lots. My corner was never part of that plat. It predates it by decades. The deed in my fireproof box describes my 4.5 acres by metes and bounds drawn before the word Cedar Hollow existed on any map. I knew that the way I know my own name because I had pulled the chain of title myself years before. Out of professional habit, the way some men check the oil in a truck they are not even planning to drive. Carol used to tease me about it. She would find me at the kitchen table on a Sunday with a county map unrolled across the oilcloth and a magnifying glass. And she would set a cup of coffee down at my elbow and say, "Walt, nobody is coming for the corner. Drink your coffee." She was wrong about that, as it turned out. But she was wrong in the kindest possible way. The way of a person who believed the world was mostly fair. I believed the world was mostly fair, too. I just also believed in keeping the receipts. Carol died 4 years back, in the spring, when her garden was just coming up. She had planted the same beds along the south fence for 30 years, beans and squash and a row of sunflowers that grew taller than the fence rail. And the cancer took her in the 11 weeks between the first diagnosis and the last morning. I did not have time to learn how to be without her. One season she was kneeling in the dirt with her hat pushed back, and the next the dirt was kneeling without her. And the sunflowers came up anyway that June, because seeds do not know how to grieve. I let the garden go a little wild after that. I could not bring myself to thin it the way she would have. So every spring it comes up half tame and half volunteer. And that is the truth of the place I was being asked to surrender 30 feet of, one assessment at a time. Diane Mercer arrived on my apron on a Tuesday in April, and the first thing I noticed was her shoes. White leather sneakers, spotless, on a property where the gravel turns to red mud the second the snow runs off. She wore a magenta blazer over a pressed blouse and a strand of pearls, and she carried a clipboard the way a sheriff carries a sidearm. Behind her sat a white luxury SUV with a vanity plate, idling, because she had not planned to stay long. She did not plan to be told no. "Mr. Hendricks," she said, reading my name off her page, as though we had not lived a quarter-mile apart for 5 years. "The association has voted to repair the public sidewalk along the Aspen Court frontage. Your parcel borders that frontage. Under the community standards, frontage repair is assessed to the adjoining owner. Your share is $2,400, due in 30 days. I set down the wrench I was holding. I wiped my hands on a rag. Slow, the way you do when you are buying yourself a second to be sure you heard a thing right. "There is no sidewalk on my frontage," I said. "There never has been." She smiled the way people smile when they have decided you are slow. "There is a concrete walk. I am looking at it." "That is the apron to my shop," I said. "It is on my land. My father poured it the year I graduated high school. It is not a public sidewalk, and the association does not own it, and neither does the county." "The board has already determined otherwise," she said. "If you would like to dispute it, you may submit a written appeal with a $60 filing fee to the Architectural Committee, which I chair." I looked at her shoes again, planted on my father's concrete, and then I looked at the vanity plate on the idling SUV, and then I looked at the clipboard. "You've got a lot of documents on that board," I said. "Did one of them happen to be the recorded plat?" She blinked. For just a second the certainty flickered, and then it closed back over, the way water closes over a dropped stone. "The plat is not relevant to a community standards matter," she said. 30 days, Mr. Hendricks." And she turned on the spotless white heel of one sneaker and walked back to the SUV. And the doors shut with the soft, expensive sound of a door that costs more than my truck. That was the first overreach. And I want you to notice how it worked, because it is the engine of the whole story. She did not ask whether the concrete was mine. She did not pull the plat. She decided. And then she billed. And then she built a fee on top of the dispute so that even arguing cost money. I have read 1,000 deeds in my life. I knew within 10 seconds of her opening sentence that she was wrong on the law and the ground both. I did not tell her that. I went inside, opened a fresh manila folder, wrote the date across the top in pencil, and filed her notice. That was the first sheet. That, before the year was out, there would be many more. I had learned the discipline of the folder a long time before Diane Mercer ever cocked a hip on my gravel. A surveyor lives and dies by the record. You do not argue a boundary in the field. You walk back to the truck, you write down what you saw, you photograph the pin in the witness tree, and you let the paper do the fighting later in a quiet room where everyone is calmer. I treated Diane the same way I had treated 31 years of fence line disputes. I did not raise my voice. I filed. Lily watched the whole first encounter from the shop doorway, a screwdriver still in her hand, because she had been helping me rebuild the carburetor on her grandmother's old garden tiller. After the SUV pulled away, she came and stood next to me. "She's going to come back, isn't she?" Lily said. It was not really a question. The girl is sharp. She had already seen the shape of it. "She will," I said. "So we are going to write everything down. Every time." You want to help me with that?" Lily nodded. From that afternoon on, she kept the camera. She is the one who started saving the footage to 2 drives, one in the house and one in the fireproof box, because she had read somewhere that a single copy is the same as no copy. I did not teach her that. She taught me. I only taught her to date everything. The first formal notice came in the mail 9 days later. Not a letter. A fine. $2,400 for the sidewalk, plus a late penalty already accruing, plus the $60 appeal fee itemized as though I had already lost the appeal I had not yet filed. I photographed it, dated it, and added it to the folder. That was sheet number 4. I drove up to the county recorder's office the following Monday, more out of caution than need, and pulled the recorded plat of Cedar Hollow and laid it next to my own deed on the broad oak counter. The clerk, a younger woman named Paula, who had started after my time but knew my name from the old plats, watched me trace the boundary with my finger. "You're the Hendricks on the 1981 sheets," she said, not really asking. "My supervisor used to point at your certifications when she trained me. Said if a Hendricks line was on it, you could build a courthouse on it." I told her that was kind, and that I hoped the line would hold up one more time. My corner sat outside the subdivision plat by a clean margin. The Aspen Court right-of-way, the strip the association claimed as public sidewalk, terminated a full 30 feet short of my apron. The concrete Diane wanted to bill me for was entirely, unambiguously, recorded as mine. Paula made me 3 certified copies without my asking, slid them across the counter with the embossed seal still warm from the press, and said, "You might want these handy." I thanked her and added them to the folder. I did not yet know how I would use them. I knew only that the ground had already decided this fight, years before, in a way no clipboard could undo. It was around then that I learned why Diane cared about 30 feet of concrete at the bottom of a dead-end street. I learned it the way you learn most things in a small subdivision, sideways, over a fence. My neighbor 2 lots up, a retired schoolteacher named Ruth, stopped me at the mailboxes on a Thursday morning. She had her mail in one hand and her reading glasses pushed up into her white hair. And she looked both ways down the road before she spoke, which told me more than her words did. "You know what they're planning down at the cul-de-sac," she said. It was not a question either. The women in this neighborhood do not waste their questions. Ruth told me that Diane's husband, a man named Greg Mercer, ran a small development company out of an office in town, and that Greg had been quietly buying up the 3 vacant lots at the bottom of Aspen Court with an eye to building a row of attached townhomes, the kind that pencil out only if you can squeeze the lot lines. He had a man out there with a transit a month ago, Ruth said. Shooting grades. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, routine, just routine. And routine men do not show up with a transit on a Saturday. The problem for Greg, Ruth said, was access. The townhome plan needed a widened road and a continuous public walk all the way to the corner, and the corner was mine. And the strip of concrete that Diane was suddenly so eager to declare public was the exact piece of ground Greg needed to be public in order for his project to work. The sidewalk assessment was not about a sidewalk. It was a wedge. If she could get me to pay for repairs on it as a public walk, she could later argue I had conceded it was public, and a conceded public walk is a foot in the door for a dedicated right-of-way. It was a long game played in fine print, and Diane was running it for her husband while wearing the costume of a volunteer. Ruth put her glasses back down on her nose, gathered her mail, and said the truest thing anyone said to me that whole year. She's not policing the neighborhood, Walt. She's surveying it. She just doesn't know that's your word. I want to be fair to the woman, because the story is not worth telling if she is only a cartoon. Diane Mercer genuinely believed her role made her right. 9 years of neighbors deferring to her, signing where she pointed, repainting trim in the shade she preferred, had taught her that the association's will and the law were the same thing. She had stopped checking. That was her flaw. Not cruelty, but incuriosity. And it is the flaw that ruins more people than malice ever has. She never once pulled the plat. She never read my deed. She assumed because she had always been allowed to assume. The second escalation came in June, and it had a uniform attached to it. A man in a navy polo with an embroidered badge that read Cedar Hollow Code Compliance knocked on my shop door on a Wednesday afternoon and informed me he was there to conduct a compliance walkthrough of my frontage. He had a clipboard of his own, a cheaper one, and he held it the way a man holds a thing he was handed that morning by someone who told him it made him official. I asked to see his credentials. He showed me a laminated card the association had printed. It was not a county badge. It was not a city badge. It was a badge Diane had ordered, the way you might order business cards, and a man she paid $40 an hour was wearing it onto my land to photograph my apron for the file she was building against me. "Sir," I said, "what agency do you work for?" He looked at the card himself, as though it might tell him. The association," he said. "The HOA." "The HOA is not an agency," I said. "It is a club. You can stand at that property line, and you can take all the pictures of public road you want. You cross onto my gravel, and you are trespassing. And the young lady on the porch is recording you, so let's both be careful." I let him stand at the property line. I did not let him past it. Lily filmed the whole thing from the porch, including the moment the man could not produce any lawful authority, and finally got back in his car and sat there a while before he drove off. Like a man who had just figured out he was the only one in the arrangement without a lawyer. That was sheet number 11, and the first time I felt the heat climb up the back of my neck. I did not act on it. I filed. By midsummer, the fines had become a staircase. The original sidewalk assessment, a penalty for an unapproved fence color, though my fence had stood unpainted cedar for 40 years, and the only color on it was the gray that cedar goes when it has watched 4 decades of weather. A fine for the shop's metal roof, which had not changed since my father bolted it down. A fine for Biscuit, classified in the citation as an unpermitted large animal, which made Lily laugh out loud when she read it, because Biscuit is 60 pounds of ranch mutt who is frightened of the vacuum cleaner. A fine for the tiller parked in my own driveway, cited as an abandoned vehicle, the same tiller Lily and I had been rebuilding, the same tiller that had been Carol's. Each one a notice, each one photographed, dated, and filed. I bought a second folder in July because the first would not close anymore. By the 4th of July, the 2 folders held 22 separate citations, and the dollar figure Diane claimed I owed had crossed $9,000. $9,000 for living the same way on the same land my family had lived for 2 generations before the woman ever moved to the county. I sat with the deputy about it once, in August, because I wanted to understand my exposure before things went further. His name was Sam Ortiz, a sheriff's deputy I knew a little from the days when I would call the office about trespassers cutting my fence to run dirt bikes through the pasture. Sam came out on a Saturday in his own time, sat on my porch in the rocker that had been Carol's, drank a glass of iced tea, and was honest with me the way good officers are honest. Which is to say, he did not pretend the law was kinder than it is. "Walt," he said, "if she files a complaint, I have to roll on it. Doesn't matter if it's nonsense. The complaint exists, so I respond. That's the job. I show up at your gate because a citizen filed paper, and the worst thing I could do is decide on my own which paper is real." He turned his hat in his hands, watching Biscuit chase a grasshopper across the yard. What I can tell you is that nonsense doesn't survive a paper trail. You keep building that folder. You document every single contact, the date, the time, who was there, what was said. If this ever crosses a line into something criminal, harassment, trespass, fraud, then the pattern you've built is what makes the case. Right now it's a civil mess, and I can't touch it. The day it stops being civil, your folder stops being a shoebox and starts being evidence. He named a number, almost in passing, the way a man names a thing he has said to a lot of people across a lot of porches. 3 or 4 documented incidents of fraudulent billing, and you've got something a DA will actually look at. Pattern is everything. 1 fine is a misunderstanding. 22 fines with photographs and dates is intent. He paused and looked at me sideways. You've already got more than that, haven't you? It was not a question. I told him I had 2 folders. He almost smiled. Of course you do. Then he finished his tea. Told Lily her dog was a good dog, even if the county would call him an unpermitted large animal, and drove off down the gravel with no hurry at all. That conversation changed the shape of the thing in my mind. It was no longer a question of whether I would win. I had known that since the day I traced the plat. It was now a question of when and how and in front of whom. Sam had handed me a countdown without quite saying so. And I went back to my folder that night and read it through cover to cover like a man checking his ammunition. Diane's third voiced overreach came in September, and it was the public one. The association held its quarterly meeting in the clubhouse. Folding chairs in rows under fluorescent lights, weak coffee in a percolator at the back, and I went, folder under my arm, mostly to listen. Diane stood at the front in a fresh magenta blazer and read my name aloud to the assembled neighbors as a delinquent owner. Mr. Hendricks, at the bottom of Aspen Court, she said, has refused every lawful assessment this board has issued and owes the association in excess of $9,000. His parcel is functionally part of our community, and his refusal to comply threatens the standards every one of you works to maintain. Functionally part of our community. I wrote that phrase down in pencil right there in the folding chair, because functionally is the word people use when they know the actual word is no. A few rows over, Ruth caught my eye and gave the smallest shake of her head. And Dale, who had come for exactly this, folded his arms and stared at the front of the room like a man memorizing a license plate. Diane had said it in front of 40 neighbors. It was now on the record, in front of witnesses, in her own voice. I did not stand up. I did not defend myself. I let her say it, and I filed it, and I went home and added the page to the second folder. And underneath it, I wrote 1 line for myself. She will say it once more. And the 3rd time there will be a uniform standing close enough to hear. That fall, the harassment widened from me to the people I dealt with. I do a little machine work still, mostly small engine repair for folks around the valley who do not want to drive an hour to a dealership. It is not a business so much as a habit I never broke, and I take cash and coffee and the occasional jar of honey for it. Diane began calling my customers. She told a rancher named Dale, who had brought me a generator to fix before the first hard freeze, that I was operating an illegal commercial business in a residential zone, and that any vehicle parked on my property could be towed at the owner's expense. Dale is 71 and was not raised to be told where he can park, and he told her where she could put that, in language I will not repeat. And then he drove straight over and told me, still hot about it, standing in my shop with his hat in his fist. She called my house, Walt. My house. Over a generator. Then she did it again, to a widow named Joan, whose chainsaw I had sharpened. And Joan does not have Dale's vinegar. Joan came up my driveway slow in her old sedan and sat in the shop a long while before she could ask me, in a small voice, whether she had gotten me in some kind of trouble, whether she should not have come. That was the one that made my jaw go tight. It is one thing to bill an old man for his own concrete. It is another to frighten a widow over a chainsaw. I told Joan she had done nothing wrong, that the trouble was upstream of her and always had been. And I sharpened a second chain for her for free, just so she would leave with something in her hands, besides worry. I photographed nothing that day because there was nothing to photograph. But I wrote down Joan's account in her own words, dated it, had her read it back to make sure I had it right, and added it to the folder. Sheet 30-something by then. I had stopped counting in my head and started trusting the paper. The day and time stamps in my folder tell the rest in a way my memory does not. October 14th, a Monday, 8 in the morning. That is when it crossed the line. I was up at the recorder's office again when Lily called me, and her voice on the phone was not the steady voice of the girl who kept the 2 drives. It was high and broken. "Grandpa, there are men at the gate. They have a saw." I told her to lock the shop door. I told her to stay inside, to keep filming through the window, and not to come out for any reason. I told her Biscuit would bark, and that was fine. Let him bark. Just stay behind the locked door. Then I drove home faster than an old man in an old truck has any business driving. The whole way I kept my voice level on the phone with her, because a frightened child miles from home does not need to hear her grandfather afraid. "I'm coming," I said. "Doors locked?" "Locked." "Biscuit with you?" "He's with me." "Good girl. Keep the camera up. I'm 5 minutes out." What I found when I turned onto the gravel was 2 men in unmarked work clothes with a gas-powered concrete saw, and Diane Mercer standing on my apron in her white sneakers directing them to cut. They had come to remove the concrete she had been billing me for, the concrete she now apparently wanted gone so that Greg could pour his own continuous public walk in its place. There was a fresh document taped to my gate, an official-looking order on association letterhead. And it was a forgery in the sense that mattered because it claimed an authority the association did not have over land the association did not own. The men had not yet made a cut. Lily's camera, steady now behind the shop window, caught all of it. Diane's finger jabbing at the concrete, the saw, the phony order on the gate. My granddaughter's voice, shaking, narrating the time and date the way I had taught her. I got out of the truck. I did not shout. I have learned that the man who shouts has already lost the high ground. I walked to the 2 workers first, not to Diane, because they were the ones holding the blade and the ones least responsible for the lie. "Do you know whose land you're standing on?" One of them looked at the order on the gate. The other looked at me, then at the saw in his hands, then back at me. "We were told it's HOA property," the first one said. "We've got a work order." "It's not their property," I said. "It's mine, recorded at the county. And that paper on the gate isn't an order, it's a printout. If you put that blade to my father's concrete, you're committing criminal mischief on private property. And that young lady in the window has been filming you for 6 minutes." Both men set the saw down on the gravel. Careful, the way you set down a thing you suddenly do not want your fingerprints on. They were workers, not criminals. They had been lied to. Same as Joan, same as the neighbors at the meeting. The moment they understood the ground was not what they had been told, they stepped back from it. Diane did not step back. "This is association property," she said, loud now, the performance cracking at the edges. "You have ignored every notice. We are exercising our right to remediate." I did not answer her. I have never in my life found the thing to say in a moment like that, and I have stopped trying to. The document on the gate said what she believed. The ground said something else, and I was about to let the ground speak. I called Deputy Ortiz from my own driveway, with Diane still talking, and I said 4 words. Sam. It crossed over. He was there in 11 minutes. Here is the reveal, and I am going to tell it the way it happened. Slow, because it happened slow. Sam Ortiz pulled up the gravel with his light bar on, but no siren. He got out, took in the saw, the men, the order taped to my gate, and Diane in her blazer. He read the order on the gate first, then he turned to me. Walt, tell me what I'm looking at. I did not give a speech. I walked to my truck, opened the fireproof box on the seat, and took out the folder and the 3 certified copies Paula had made me back in the spring. I unfolded the recorded plat of Cedar Hollow on the hood of my truck in the cold October light. And beside it, I laid my deed, the one drawn by meets and bounds in a hand older than the subdivision. I put my finger on the line where the Aspen Court right-of-way ended, 30 feet short of the apron. And I moved my finger to the apron itself, and I said only, "This concrete is here. The public right-of-way ends here. Recorded in 1981. Surveyed and signed." I turned the deed so Sam could read the signature block. The surveyor of record on the original boundary, the man whose certification sat at the bottom of the very plat the county relied on, was W. Hendricks. Me. 31 years on the job, and the map that proved Diane wrong was a map I had signed with my own hand before she ever moved to the valley. Sam looked at the plat. He looked at the deed. He looked at the signature. And then he looked at me. And something settled in his face. The recognition of a man who has just watched a fight end before it started. He took his time. He set one finger on the recorded date, 1981, and one finger on the certification block, and he read the name there twice. Then he turned to Diane Mercer, and his voice was flat and official and final. "Ma'am, this is private property. This order has no legal force. Step off the apron and tell your men to load that saw." The silence after that lasted a long time. Diane's mouth opened and closed. The pearls at her throat went up and down once. The clipboard, for the first time since April, hung at her side useless. And her white sneakers, planted all year on ground she thought she controlled, were standing on the one piece of evidence that proved she never had. She looked at the plat on the hood of my truck. And I watched the exact moment she understood that she had spent 6 months billing a county surveyor for a survey he had drawn. And the understanding went across her face like a shadow crossing a field. She did not say functionally. She did not say community standards. For once in 9 years, Diane Mercer did not say anything at all. Let me give you the 2 numbers, because they sit so close together that you can feel the gap. In 9 years of presidency, Diane Mercer had collected fines from every owner in Cedar Hollow who ever flinched. From me, in 6 months of citations totaling more than $9,000, she had collected exactly 0, not $1. And the document that ended it had been recorded in 1981, 43 years before she taped a forged order to my gate. $0 against 43 years. That is the whole story in 2 numbers. The consequence did not need my help. It fell out of her own actions, the way water finds the low ground. The forged order on the gate, filmed by a 15-year-old from a locked shop, was attempted criminal mischief and trespass, and Sam's report named Diane as the person directing it. The fraudulent billing, all 22 citations, became the documented pattern he had told me about on my porch in August. The county opened a fraud inquiry into the association's assessments, and once the auditors started pulling threads, they found Greg's townhome plan and the quiet purchase of the 3 vacant lots. And the conflict of interest that Diane had buried under the word functionally came up into the daylight. The board removed her in an emergency vote before Thanksgiving. Here is the part that surprised even me. When the fraud inquiry froze the association's accounts, Greg's company was already overextended on the 3 vacant lots at the bottom of Aspen Court, the lots his whole townhome scheme depended on. He had borrowed against the project on the assumption that the public walk across my corner was a formality. When the corner held, the project died. The loans came due, and the bank put the 3 lots up at a trustee's sale in February. I went to that sale. I sat in a cold county hearing room with my folder on my knee, and when the auctioneer opened the bidding on the block that Diane Mercer had spent a year trying to widen a road through, I raised my hand. There was almost no one else in the room. The man who had wanted the block could not bid on it, because the block was the very thing that had ruined him. I bought all 3 lots, the whole bottom of the street, for less than the fines Diane had once claimed I owed. I did not buy them out of spite. I bought them because Carol always said the cul-de-sac should have stayed open ground, and because I would sooner own it myself than watch it squeezed into lot lines that pinched. The block is pasture again now. Biscuit has more room to be insulted by passing cars. Greg's townhome project died on the desk of the same county planning office his wife had tried to leverage, because no continuous public walk could ever cross my recorded corner without my signature, and I was never going to sign. She tried to take 30 feet of my concrete to widen a road for her husband's profit, and what she lost was the road, the project, the 3 lots, the presidency, and the deference she had mistaken for authority for 9 years. I did not gloat. There was nothing to say that the plat had not already said better. I folded the deed back into the fireproof box, and I drove the 3 certified copies back up to Paula at the recorder's office, and I thanked her because she had handed me the ending back in April without either of us knowing it. That evening, Lily and I sat on the porch. Biscuit lay across both our feet like a sandbag, snoring, unbothered by the cars that had stopped coming. The October light went gold and then went blue over the pasture, and Carol's garden, gone to seed along the south fence, rattled a little in the wind, the dead sunflower heads nodding the way they always did. Lily had the camera in her lap, finally idle, the little red light off for the first time in months. "Grandma's tiller still doesn't run right," she said. "We never finished it." We had not. The carburetor we had been rebuilding the day Diane first drove up was still in pieces on the bench, laid out in order under a shop rag exactly where we had left it. "We'll finish it this weekend," I told her. "Saturday, you and me. We'll have it running before the first snow, and we'll turn over your grandmother's beds for spring." She leaned her head on my shoulder, 15 and safe and a little proud, and we watched the dark come down over 4.5 acres of ground, and now the whole bottom of the street besides, that no one was ever going to take. Because the paper said so, and the paper was older than all of them. So here is the lesson, plain, the way I would tell it to you across my own fence. Your deed is the truth, but only if you can find it. Go to your county recorder this week and pull the recorded plat of your own property. It costs a few dollars in an afternoon. Lay it next to your deed and read the boundary description against the actual ground. Walk it, find your pins, photograph your corners. If an association or a code office or anyone with a clipboard tells you that you owe something, do not argue and do not pay. Not yet. Ask them to put it in writing, and then put their writing in a folder with the date on it, and start the folder before you think you need it. Because by the time you are sure you need it, it is already months too late to start. Document every contact. Save it to 2 places. Talk to your neighbors, because the pattern you cannot see alone becomes obvious the moment 3 of you compare notes. The clipboard is a costume. The deed is the law. Keep the record, and the record keeps you. If you have got a story like this one, a fence, a gate, a strip of concrete, a board that decided it owned something it never did, put it in the comments. Because I read them, and so do the folks who need to hear they are not alone in it. Subscribe if you want more of these, because there is always another one. The valley is full of them. And next time, I am going to tell you about the man up the canyon whose HOA tried to bill him for the water in his own creek, not knowing his grandfather had filed the senior water right in 1962. Until then, pull your plat, walk your line, keep your folder,